Are you feeling lost in the digital wilderness? Welcome to Lost in Cyberia. We are your guide to navigating the world of cyberspace.
So whether you're a tech enthusiast or you're looking to land your first job in InfoSec, we're here to break things down into bite-sized pieces so that you don't have to. All right. So welcome back to another episode of Lost in Cyberia. We're your hosts, Annie-Mei
And Anika.
And today we have a special guest on the show from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, James Corera. So welcome to the show, James.
Lovely. Thank you both for having me.
No worries. So I'll quickly just read out your bio. So James is the director of ASPI's Cyber Technology and Security Program. He is a senior national security practitioner with nearly 2 decades experience in foreign policy and intelligence. He has provided influential advice to government at the highest levels, driving policy responses to evolving global threats and those impacting Australia's place in the world. This included serving as Intelligence Liaison Officer to Australia's Foreign Minister and representing Australia abroad through diplomatic postings to Indonesia and Malaysia, where he worked closely with international partners to further stability and resilience against shared threats. James has also led teams central to Australia's intelligence policy and coordination effort, international partnerships, protective security, enterprise capability, governance and oversight, and enterprise risk.
We might not have any time left for the podcast.
It's quite a lot, yeah.
It's quite a lot. I think it comes down to, it sounds fancy, sounds like a lot really. It's a lot of time trying to figure out problems and solutions to challenges where there aren't any easy solutions. That really is the core across everything there.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is actually a really good segue to our first question.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, or ASPI, and what do you do in your day-to-day role?
Great question. So ASPI set up 2001 as a think tank by the then Howard government, the rationale being that the government of the day and successive governments wanted policy contestability, recognising there's a lot of challenges that confront, but in order to figure out how Australia on its own or together with its partners should navigate those challenges, you wanted a diversity of views, so you don't end up with an echo chamber. ASPI largely started as a defence think tank, and what's interesting today, standing in 2025, is I'm here as Director of Cyber Technology and Security. A whole range of topics. I don't know if the people who first conceived of ASPI back in 2001 expected we would need to cover and expected that ASPI should be covering it. But these are really a set of issues that come together at that intersection of tech and security. What do I do in my day-to-day job? Honestly, I don't know. It feels like I do a random set of issues. My team, I'm fortunate to have quite a diverse set of experts and skill sets. So we've got everything from analysts who focus on China all the way through to data scientists, through to people who are great at exploiting kind of deeply hidden linguistic data sources across 3 areas, I would say. China investigations, looking at where China's power is manifesting, not today or tomorrow, but over the horizon. And what does that mean for Australia? What does it mean for our region? Coercive statecraft and resilience, so how are hybrid threats materialising? How do we need to counter and combat them with an equal focus on problem and solution? And then critical and emerging technologies, recognising that technology now is really an instrument of statecraft and national power. And in order to thrive, both from a national security, economic prosperity, social well-being perspective, requires countries, regions to navigate that minefield of technology, mindful of both opportunities and risks.
Yeah, wow. Okay, so this covers quite a broad spectrum.
Quite broad.
Your job description is just like whatever is required.
I think it would be better if we just summarise it in one sentence that just says as required.
Yeah. So obviously we mentioned a lot of the things that you have done in your bio, but can you tell us a bit about your career journey, maybe even a little bit about what you studied at university and what led you to where you are now? Yeah,
so I studied at Monash University in Melbourne, and I was focused, pre-2001 then, focused on 9/11, terrorism, and trying to understand the logic of terrorist violence. I was doing that and a law degree at the time, and figured, look, it's an individual choice, it's a personal thing. For me, practicing law wasn't where I thought I wanted to go. I was really interested in terrorism studies, international relations, and so then found myself with a stint at the Office of National Assessments at the time, what is now ONI, looking at transnational issues, so terrorist violence, counter-proliferation, procurement networks, illicit financing. And so that was essentially a period of time focused on trying to understand the problems, diagnose them, using all-source analysis, and providing that diagnosis up to senior policymakers and decision makers. Did that for a while, and then thought, you know what, I'd really like to get overseas. You speak about all of these challenges and problems, but these aren't problems that Australia alone can fix. We need partners. We need to engage with our neighbourhood. And so I was really pleased and excited to be able to join our foreign ministry for a period of time. That included postings in Indonesia, Malaysia. And the unifying theme there was for Australia to succeed, we need to be in lockstep with our region. And so that was time spent diagnosing the problems, time spent in trying to build the partnerships to resolve that. Came back and, as you said at the outset, had a unique opportunity to be a departmental rep into then the Foreign Minister's office, where my role was really to brief on intelligence of the day. What were the insights we were seeing? What does this mean in terms of consequences? And what could we do about it in response? Really unique opportunity to see the weight that sits on our senior decision makers, be it prime ministers, foreign ministers, national security committees of cabinet, how serious, regardless of what side of politics it is, they take those responsibilities, and how hard it is to navigate those challenges, that there are no easy solutions. There are a set of compromises that we have to make and rough terrain that we have to navigate. Did that, so that was then time spent trying to explain problems. And then final phase in government was time spent trying to uplift and harden capability, recognising that we have to adapt, that the challenges and the threat actors are persistently changing, and therefore so do we. And that requires us to change both how we organise ourselves as a government, how we work with industry, and how we work across the economy.
Yeah, very cool.
Well, yeah,
I've done the full life cycle.
Yeah.
I had the same experience with law, where
Yes.
I started in law and it was more of a personal.
Yep.
Yeah, it was like, this is not for me.
But I find now, like in cyber, right, and we might get to this, it's really interesting now, that intersection of legal practitioners, governance, accountability boards, and the actual ICT practitioners itself, and needing to have all of those people around the table now. So I think some familiarity with the law is really useful. But yeah, for me, the idea of practicing it on a daily basis wasn't. We definitely need the legal profession, but it wasn't for me.
I absolutely can agree that having that background in law has been very helpful in my career, especially as we outsource so much.
Yes.
And a lot of our threats are sitting in contracts and liability. And you've touched a little bit about how ASPI recognized the need to be more diverse and it was created out of the need to have diversity.
Yep.
And do you feel like we have enough diversity right now of people in national security and cybersecurity, or do you think we need more people, and why?
Look, I think it's a great question. Short answer is no. I don't know if we ever reach a point where we have something such as enough diversity. I think you can always do with more. And, I love you. Both of you wrote a piece in the ASPI Strategist, which I think is perfect because, at least from my perspective, if I come at it from what are the threats that are confronting and therefore what do we need to respond, the threats each day are becoming more diverse, more diffuse. They're picking up speed. They're more enabled by technology. There isn't a set or single profile that they're following. Some are top down, some are bottom up. Complexity. We're forced to wrestle with complexity on a daily basis. If that's the case, and I think most people would agree with that, and most threat assessments that we see back that in, then it makes sense, at least to me, that we would leverage the full diversity of our talent base, right? That means across gender, across professional skill sets, across professional experience, because surely the answer, the way to navigate and find success has to be how we bring that together. I think you could ask the three of us the same question almost as a blind test, and we'd answer it in three different ways. It doesn't mean each answer is wrong. Probably the strength comes from actually how you bring those three answers together for me. So I don't think we have enough diversity. I don't think we ever will have enough diversity, but we should certainly keep striving for it in every form.
And you mentioned with adversaries and the threats and stuff that Australia are facing are so varied. So what do you think are the biggest threats that Australia is facing then?
It's an interesting question because it almost premises down to Australia alone, right? And I think there's an element here of it's Australia, it's our region, it's probably the Western rules-based order. And the threats, we go back even just 20 years ago, I could probably answer that in a segmented fashion. I could say at that point, it's terrorism, right? Go back post 9/11, I would have, without hesitation, said the biggest threat confronting us at that point in time was terrorism. 20-something years later, I can't give you a single answer. There isn't one single threat. It's that we have multiple threats, whether it be cyber, whether it be hybrid threats like sabotage or foreign interference, whether it be espionage, whether it be supply chain risks and monopolization of critical and emerging technologies and research and development, are all coming together in this really combustible fuel mix. And so we can try to respond to it, I think, as individual countries. We could even try and pick off individual manifestations. But it feels to me, at least, that we're not really going to get to the heart of it until we bring that diversity together, until we see that systems of systems perspective and recognise that they're compounding and cascading and feeding one another. A bit of an evasive answer to what was quite a simple question. What's the biggest threat?
Everything's.
Yeah, everything. Everything is
and
a
nothing.
threat.
It's somewhere in the spectrum.
Summarises cyber security, I guess.
Yeah, very much so.
Anything could be a threat.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes. I think with cyber, internet in general, has opened up the world to us, to, I guess, good actors, but also malicious actors, obviously, and sometimes there isn't really much of a difference in certain cases. And sovereignty becomes so interesting in this case. Correct. Because a lot of laws are written from a perspective of sovereignty. When we're talking about national security, it's grounded in sovereignty. And how do we then attract that diversity? Keeping in mind the need for sovereignty from a national security and legal perspective, but also understanding that it's the thing that potentially could be impeding us.
It is a fantastic question because in some ways it gets to the crux of the challenge that confronts that we still seem to think about these at a state-based level as individual countries, and yet the threat actors, the threat landscape that confronts denies us that ease, right? And I love words like sovereignty because they can mean so many things to so many different people. I think almost we could have a conversation about sovereignty at a high level and go away and fundamentally mean completely different things, right? So what sovereignty means in terms of defense capabilities could well be different to what sovereignty means when we talk about hyperscale cloud and digitization and AI. And so for me, there's an element, almost a spectrum of transitioning from the use of the word sovereignty, and what does that mean at the sharpest end, to potentially control when we talk about data. What does data control mean? And so then that brings in things like data localization. And in that sense, if you understand where it's about control and not sovereignty in that traditional sense, then it also positions us, I think, to work more with our partners in the region, looking at what partnered solutions should be. Again, if we say we want diversity, it can't just be diversity within Australia's national borders. It's got to be with our partners in the region who are seeing the threats in different ways, and even partners further afield like the EU or Japan, for example. So yeah, I think it's a great question because it does force us to perhaps go back and do our homework on when we say sovereignty, what do we mean and what are we applying it to?
Yeah, I recently did some mentoring for some Indonesian cybersecurity people who were mostly working in the Indonesian government, and they were here paid for by the Australian government. It was a collaboration between RMIT and Indonesia, and they were basically building projects that they wanted to do to form kind of collaboration. They were all coming over to see what issues that we had, that they could then look at what the issues that they were experiencing in their work. And it was interesting because there was a lot of issues that they had that I see as well. So I think there is a lot of opportunity for that collaboration. And when they were asking questions, about the frameworks and things that we use, like in terms of like cyber governance and things like that. But yeah, it was interesting that when they would ask us questions or like want feedback on their projects, it was kind of like they were looking to us for answers, but I was like, I don't have the answers. I was like, I'm sorry, but, there's a million ways you could tackle this, but there's not one right answer.
Correct.
And I was like, well, I can learn as much from you, all of you, as much as you can learn from me. So, yeah, in terms of that, I think, are there policies that you think that Australia should be implementing in this space?
So look, I think that's a fantastic answer, Annie-Mei, because there is both, it's refreshing and there's a humility to it, right? Which I think in terms of Australia's foreign policy, what we're seeing is that respect and humility, that we're trying a bunch of things, but we don't pretend it's the answer or the solution or that it's perfect. It's our response, but we're learning and we've got to refine those responses. And understanding how to refine those responses requires us to understand how the region's dealing with the threats, which for me kind of brings in this element of persistent adaptation, right? Like that, how do we get to a mature point where that we need to change something or refine it or adapt it? Doesn't mean what came before was wrong. It was the right answer at that point in time based on what we knew, but we're standing at a different point in time with a different knowledge base, more opportunities or avenues available to us. So why shouldn't we adapt? To your question then of, well, what's the kind of policy that we need to fix, that we need to change? For me, there's almost an element that suggests what we've got at the moment is broken, right? And I don't think it is. I think we've got good people across multiple departments and agencies that are coming at it from different perspectives, with different lenses, different portfolio interests at play. And I think that's right. That's what we need. For me, the one element that I think we can keep working on in the same way as we can keep working on diversity is how do we stitch it together so it's cohesive? That on the one hand, how does our cyber security strategy and Horizon 2 relate to what we're doing from an investment perspective for data centers and cloud-based computing? And what does that then mean for economic security and research security? I think it's less about a policy setting and more the national conversation we have that recognises the problems are multifaceted. There are multiple nodes that we kind of need to come at this from, and that's exactly what we're doing. But let's explain and let's kind of have a more informed national conversation about how that stitches together. For me, importantly, that's not just government having that conversation, right? Like that's why your podcast is so valuable, so important, because it's a different set of voices, different players that are coming to play. We need business. We need some small to medium enterprises, right? Like those small voices that are otherwise excluded from this, as much as we need.
It goes
the big...
back to the sovereignty thing as well.
Correct.
Yeah,
correct. So I think there's almost an element of we often expect government to fix it. Government is a first leader. It's the first mover by necessity. It deals with certain things at the highest end of the spectrum in terms of highest harm, highest impact. But I think we're in a really exciting phase where there's room for more of us to get engaged, get involved in the problem, because let's be honest, there's so much of the problem there for us to kind of tackle.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and I think you said it right. Australia is doing so much and is trying so hard to be that speaker in the international world scene on cybersecurity, and we had amazing efforts by the e-safety commissioner protecting our people from within, and then we also have our outside security as well. From your perspective, being on that intersection, I guess, what do you think, for example, is the biggest challenge and threat as we have a new generation coming up of people that, as opposed to us, I guess, have never seen a life without a phone in their hands, without a computer.
The Gen Zs.
Or Gen Alphas even, yes. And how do we then protect them, but also enable them, and then attract them to this industry so they can also provide that diversity to us and provide their thinking?
I think it's a fascinating question, Anika, and I guess in answering it, I answer it both from a perspective of that national security cyber lens, but then I also answer it as a father. With kids, I know I wrestle with this on a daily basis, this new sense of constant connectivity, right? That we are always connected. And what does that mean? What does that mean in terms of what's shaping my thought patterns and what consumes my brain on a given day? What's shaping my behavior? What's shaping my interactions and what relationships I prioritize? And then how I engage with those relationships? And ultimately, what's shaping my place in the world? Now, at least I had a period in my kind of development growth cycle where I wasn't as consumed by that echo chamber, if you will. But for my children, this generation, mostly they are. And I don't think we've quite wrestled what that means for things like mental health. What does that mean for that balance between privacy erosion and data exploitation? I challenge, I'll put my hand up and say, those end user licenses agreements that we get when we buy a new phone or we sign on an app. I said I started a law degree. I didn't say I was really good at it. I can guarantee you I do not read every single line of that and then understand what I am actually agreeing to. We talk about data sovereignty. Are we talking enough about what data sovereignty means at a nation-state level, but also at an individual level? And then there is the scarier manifestations of this, which is that misinformation, disinformation, and dare I say, algorithmic radicalization, and how that is then exploiting, intensifying those pockets of isolation. Again, go back to mental health challenges at play. And we're seeing that in this really combustible and self-selection approach to ideology, right? Where it's almost you pick and mix a whole range of issues and then you combine it together in a really vitriolic, ugly manifestation of hate. And you can go from 0 to 100 in terms of acting on that hate, with violence becoming normalized much more than ever before. And that scares me. But part of me thinks the solution is not then to disconnect necessarily, but the reality is we are now in this environment. How can we use the environment that has given us so much, and yes, given us these risks and these dangers, to combat that? I think it's an element of how do we teach the current generation to swim? We are an island continent. As a result, our generations grow up doing lifesavers and learning how to swim in the ocean, right? And learning how to detect a rip. Because, you know what, if you don't, you have a higher risk of drowning. What's the digital equivalent of that for us? I think more and more. We can't go back to being a digital island nation where we agree we're going to unplug the servers every Friday night and plug them back in on Monday morning. What does that look like for us as a national challenge, a national conversation?
That's a great question.
Yeah, interesting what you said about people living in that echo chamber now, because I think even when I look at my friends, even when I think back to when I was at university, which was 10 years ago, we were taught to debate and to see each other's point of view, even if we didn't agree, but it was about understanding where the other person was coming from. Whereas I feel like now, everyone just follows certain people online that they agree with. They are in that constant, all their friends will think a certain way. And so everything becomes homogenous after a while, and it's kind of concerning to me that also maybe also thinking about how AI plays into that now with the whole critical thinking piece as well. I don't know what my question actually is, but I guess as you were saying before, how 20 years ago you would have said that terrorism is a main threat to Australia, and now we have all these kind of niche communities online and far-right extremists and incels and things like that, especially for young men in Australia. And there's a lot of talk about the loneliness epidemic and COVID and stuff played into that too, especially because ASPI, as well as an organisation, is about providing that diversity of thought. Have you seen that being impacted by people's different perspectives?
Look, anyway, I think you hit the nail on the head when you spoke about this. Somehow along the way lost the art to debate and have a conversation and perhaps get to the end of it and still not fundamentally agree with one another, but go, okay, well, that doesn't mean you're less patriotic. It doesn't mean you're less committed to Australia's interests, that you're less human and want humankind to prosper and succeed. Kind of somehow along the way, we've taken difference to be read as an attack. Ironically enough, at exactly the same time, we were probably having the most conversation about diversity than we've ever had in terms of generations, right? So the irony is quite astounding. I think in some ways that is interesting. Then you pick up on that loneliness aspect for young men. You know, I'm wearing a bracelet at the moment which is about men's mental health, and it's I'm a safe space. And I think it's ultimately this idea that whether it be young men, whether it be women, whether it be people of different sexual orientations, how do we create spaces where people can have their views, we can debate, we can contest, and that perhaps recognise the answer lies somewhere in the middle, not at the extremes. Why? Because in some ways the answer is iterative. I've got to try something first. It's not going to be perfect, and I acknowledge that. We will need to refine, we will need to adapt it, as opposed to reaching some state of nirvana or perfection immediately. It feels like we want all of the answers in its full sense to its complete maturity here and now. And anything short of that is taken as an attack on me as an individual, as a person. And then somewhere along the lines, I've normalised the idea that I can then respond to that frustration through the use of violence. That's, I think, what we need to chip away at, and that requires us almost to come at it from multiple angles. It's a national conversation. It's about mental health. It's about digital literacy and how this technology works, how we bake in constructive questioning. I've read something. It might not be the case. Maybe I need to go and do some independent research and analysis to go, well, sounds interesting, but I don't know if that's right or not. How do we almost slow things down so we can unpick it in a way that allows us to then put it back together and then live comfortably and go, hey, we agree on 40% of things. Isn't that pretty good? Like, could we not start with that and then build up?
Yeah.
And I think the word debate has changed its meaning since you were last in university and to what it means now, and definitely current events of the world, I think, make us question what debate started to mean. And
feels more like argument now.
So it's good or bad. It's good or bad. It was putting people in two buckets,
correct.
I think. Yeah.
It's a boxification of people.
Which goes back to that piece you wrote some time back, right? That idea that we could put someone's talent and define it exclusively in a single box. You're an engineer or...
Technical, non-technical.
Correct. People sure have qualifications. They might have insights or a perspective, but they're more than that. So why would we box you in that way?
That's a great question. Has a lot of factors, right, to it. And this is more like a self-indulgence, right? I got to have the opportunity to do some terrorism research in my criminology degree, which was very interesting. And I took the view of looking at it from a feminist perspective and then looking at the male supremacy groups and finding a connection between male supremacy and then terrorism, or homegrown terrorism, but also international terrorism. And there is connection to ISIS, and there is connections to the current right-wing group that we have, not just in Australia, but in other places as well. And I guess listening to you saying, I was like, yes, this is what we need to do. We do need to slow down. We do need to enable people to understand what they're seeing. But from an individual perspective, what can each one of us take away from this episode and go home to their families, to their friends, and change in their behavior to create that environment where we are safe to do so, to safe debate again?
So I think it comes down to, for the most part, that's a bit of a generalization, people are not irrational. There is a logic. That logic can be perverted along a way, can be poisoned, it can be kind of derailed. Absolutely. But there is a logic. There are a set of factors, environmental, personal based, that are driving people that way. Part of the reason I was so attracted to terrorism studies in the first instance was this idea that what is the process that has driven someone? We all have a mother, and so we're all children in that. How did we start as gone from that to an individual that has decided that violence is appropriate and that they will exercise violence as a means to force a change in behaviour? In a similar way for me, with all of the challenges that I confront, again, we can disagree, but let me try to, as much as I can, understand and use a bit of empathy to look at what's driven you there, what are your policy prescriptions, and why you think that's the right solution. Doesn't mean I have to agree with you, but it does give me the best ability to try and attract you, and I deliberately use the word attract because I can't compel you, attract you to my arguments, and do it in a way that recognises I might actually have to settle halfway through as well. So I think what can we each do is probably, it sounds a bit soft and wishy-washy, a bit more empathy. Just try to understand what has led someone to that perspective. I don't know anyone who wakes up in the morning, whether that be in a job for a company or working for government, that deliberately wakes up in the morning and goes, you know what I'm going to do today? I've thought about this carefully. I'm deliberately going to do a really bad job. I've decided I really want to stuff something up, and that's my goal for today. People, generally speaking, start wanting to do the right thing, wanting to help, wanting to advance the cause. We all go about it in different ways. Again, if we can find some way to spend a bit more of our time, maybe not all of it, let's not kind of be too dreamlike, but a bit more time focusing on what do we actually have in common, and then figure out how we can pivot some solutions off that commonality and acknowledge it's a starting point. It'll get me out of this week at least, and then we will need to kind of refine and attract. And how do we do it in a way that that conversation is aligned so that you and I, the three of us sitting around a coffee table having that conversation, isn't wildly inconsistent to the conversation the country's having at a national level or the country's having internationally with its partners. It is all really the same conversation we should be having, just coming at it from different perspectives.
Yeah, I think with the recent Australian election, and I cried so much, I'll be honest, because I was very scared that we're going to take the path of division, and I think having our Prime Minister congratulate and also give respect to his opponent and not allowing the criticism and the remarks to go his way was such a testament to me that such respect for Australia. I was absolutely stunned in the best way possible, and that's a good example, I think, of that, and treat each other as humans, and we do have a lot in common. We have research that shows when we shun someone, right? We had all these groups on Reddit. The incel group started on Reddit, right? And a lot of right-wing groups, and they were banned. And they created a monster of many heads. When you take one head away, they become bigger and bigger. And so if fighting fire doesn't work, to distinguish fire, I guess we'll have to try some water and have some empathy. And
Look, I think Australia's, we're lucky in so many ways that we still haven't gone down that path to the same extent. We can see some of the indicators creep in. I loved your example. It is heartening that after such a tough election campaign, both the Prime Minister and the opposition leader acknowledged one another in their respective speeches. Again, having spent time, being fortunate enough to spend time in Parliament, you see beyond question time the extent to which that building does actually force and encourage and benefits from people with different views and perspectives coming together and figuring out a solution. I think we haven't lost the challenge. We've still got an opportunity and a road to move. And that's where I think, whether it be politicians, whether it be business leaders, whether it be religious organisations, the more we can all say, again, what's been great about Australia is we all come here for different backgrounds, different perspectives, figure out what's the national conversation we really want to have in a way that still emphasises we are a united nation, that we don't have to break ourselves apart and and tear ourselves down to say, sure, there are things we could do better, absolutely, and that's not a criticism, that's not necessarily even a reflection on history. We should always strive to do better, but we don't have to do it at the expense of, I don't have to win only if I kind of win at the expense of you losing.
I think also, in my experience too, when we all get off our phones and we actually just hang out with each other, it's usually fine. You know, like we can all have a rational conversation. And it made me think of when I lived in China back in 2014, and there's always this narrative, especially in the media, that Chinese and Americans like hate each other and they're both spying on each other. And of course, like the governments are. Yeah. But when it comes down to the people.
Correct.
And when I was over there were a lot of Americans in China, and the Chinese were fine. That didn't have an issue with them. Like, you know, and again, it comes down to finding that commonality. Often that would be, say, things like food or drinking or, you know, and when you are hanging out with people from different backgrounds, of course, occasionally something might come up, whether it's someone's religion or whatever, that could cause like some form of conflict. But most of the time it gets resolved immediately because everyone will just say, hey, maybe just chill out, it's fine. So, yeah, I think like when we actually take the time to spend more time with each other in person and get to know people from different cultures and backgrounds, we realise that we're not that different from each other.
and I think disagreement doesn't have to equate to offence, and offence doesn't have to equate to conflict.
Yeah.
People are very quick to kind of suggest that ASPI as a think tank has a single view and is opposed to all things China. Now, that's not the case. There are fundamental, serious issues that ASPI highlights through its research, for example, with the Chinese Communist Party.
Yeah, exactly. And the government is always different to the people, right?
Yes,
Correct.
absolutely.
Yeah. Correct. But we have such a rich culture in Australia. We benefit from generations of migration from mainland China, from the region. Those people make an important contribution to our country on a daily basis, and we should continue to encourage that. Ideally, we can do that whilst at the same time calling out malign behaviour by a government. Doesn't mean that becomes racism. We should be able to distinguish the two, have the conversation respectfully, and then I think, you know, recognise that in many ways we're all here because we wanted to be here in some ways. So let's enjoy that reality.
Yeah.
We have to grapple that two things can be true at once.
Correct.
It's hard. Sometimes it's hard for someone who is used to this dichotomous view that only one thing can be the optimal truth. But the more you work in a space like this, right, you understand that so many things can be holding value and holding truth.
That is a perfect encapsulation. Yep.
Well, I think that's a good place to end it. Cool. Well, thank you so much, James, for taking the time to come and talk to us today. Well, actually, we should say we came to talk to you.
Thank you for letting us.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me on board, and thank you for such a stimulating, diverse, far-ranging conversation. I kind of find that we covered so much ground interesting in itself.
Yeah, I think we really did. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you everyone for tuning in to this episode of Lost in Cyberia.
And we will catch you next time. Bye.
Bye.